There were two main classes in ancient Rome, patricians and plebeians. The patricians were those citizens of Rome who could trace their lineage back to the first senators. The very name, patrician, comes from the Latin word patres, that is, fathers. According to a legend recounted by Plutarch, the founder of Rome himself, Romulus, singled out 100 of the best citizens and appointed them advisors. The assembly of these counselors was called the Senate, and they themselves were called the fathers of the people, the patricians. Romulus used this name to emphasize the importance of their paternal concern for the welfare of the Roman people. The plebeians originally had no political rights in Rome. This changed after a long struggle, with the plebeians ostentatiously leaving Rome for the sacred mountains outside the city limits. Or, to avoid going too far, to the Aventine Hill, which, however, was also outside the boundaries of the city of Rome at the time. Thus the plebeians showed their dissatisfaction with the one-man rule of the patricians. Their struggle was crowned with success, and the posts of people's tribunes and aediles, assistant tribunes in the magistrates, were introduced. At first, the people's tribunes could formally make laws only for the plebeians, while the patricians were subordinate only to the Senate. But over time they gained equal rights and could veto the decisions of magistrates, including patrician magistrates. Already in the first written laws of Rome, the so-called laws of the 12 tables, equal rights were established for all Roman citizens, regardless of origin. Initially among these laws was one prohibiting marriage between plebeians and patricians, but a year later it was repealed. This was done by the people's tribune Gaius Canuleius. He also wanted to ensure that plebeians, like patricians, could become consuls. But the Senate decided otherwise. As a compromise, a new position of military tribune with consular power was introduced, to which plebeians could also be elected. And in the 3rd century BC, the wealthiest plebeian families merged with the patrician ones into a class called the nobility. Nobility means nobility in Latin. The word plebiscite also comes from ancient Rome, the name given to the decisions of plebeian assemblies, which from 287 BC became binding on all citizens, plebeians and patricians alike. Wealthy Romans joined the new class of horsemen. The patricians, however, reappeared in the 1st century. During the Principate, beginning with the reign of Octavian Augustus, the imperial nominees began to be called so. The old patrician families had by then largely been extinct, so now the patricians were appointed by the emperor. Everything was simpler with the plebeians. The noble plebeian families, which had been tracing their lineage back to ancient times, joined the nobility and then the horsemen. So did the nouveau riches, because the property qualification in the division of Roman citizens into classes during the reform of Servius Tullius made wealth, not origin, the main thing. The poor, on the other hand, formed the Roman plebs. The Romans, who had no property at all, were called proletarians. It should be remembered that besides Roman citizens, there were foreigners without Roman citizenship in the city, as well as slaves. Any plebeian could count on assistance from the Roman state, received free bread during food distributions, and had all civil rights, including suffrage. Non-citizens, women, and slaves had no such rights. A woman's status was determined before marriage by the status of her father, and after marriage by the social status of her husband. Originally, the patricians in ancient Rome were those who ruled, and the plebeians were those who were ruled. And no matter what the two classes were called afterwards, the essence remained. The patrician of the 2nd century A.D., appointed by the emperor to a high position, despite the dissimilarity of his position, origin and way of life to the patrician of the 4th century B.C., performed the same function in the Roman state. The plebs could influence legislation through the tribunes of the people, but it was always the patricians who wrote the laws.